That's okay, Drake. How could you have known it was me? Kevin calmly sat back in his chair and sipped his coffee.
Mr. Williams, I had no idea that you were eating here today. Unfortunately, we're not prepared for you. Would you like me to set up one of the upstairs rooms for you?
Drake asked politely. Blair and his guests couldn't believe their ears. They had never been offered one of the upstairs private rooms. The highest they ever got was the 3rd floor. Only the most influential people in Chicago were invited upstairs. Not today, thanks, Kevin casually replied.
All right, Mr. Williams, since you're okay with this room, I won't force you.
After saying this, Drake immediately turned around and said to one of his brawny bodyguards,
Go and tell the manager in the lobby downstairs to make arrangements. All the expenses in this room are on the house.
The group had no idea what to think. They'd just spent a half an hour being rude to Kevin, and now Drake was treating him like royalty. As the man was walking out of the room to carry out Drake's instructions, Kevin suddenly put down his coffee cup. Wait, Kevin said amiably. I only drank half a cup of coffee. Just ask him to comp my coffee. Then Kevin slowly stood up and glanced at Blair, who was standing there in shock. He chuckled quietly and left the room. Go back to work, Drake. I'm going to take a stroll, Kevin said nonchalantly.
Okay, Mr. Williams, enjoy your walk. If you need anything, just let me know.
Drake gestured for his men to follow him out of the room. A moment later, Officer Emmett sped out of the room and ran after Kevin. Kevin, where are you going? She asked in embarrassment. I'm going home, Kevin answered her indifferently. Why don't I take you home? Officer Emmett offered. I'm really sorry for all this. I didn't expect it to get so unpleasant. It's no big deal. They're just a bunch of rich, spoiled brats, Kevin said very calmly. Officer Emmett seemed happy to hear that he was taking it so well. Thank you so much. I can't let you take a taxi home. Let me give you a ride, Officer Emmett said cheerfully. Kevin nodded his head and said, Okay. Kevin and Officer Emmett had just gotten to the parking lot when Blair ran over to them. Kelly, what are you doing? Blair asked in confusion. Then he glared at Kevin. He figured Drake had been so nice to him because he was related to Grandma Jones. Blair knew that Mitchell Cook had given Grandma a birthday present, so it made sense for them to be welcoming to Kevin. I'm taking Kevin home. You know, I brought him here to help you. After all this, I just can't leave him here without a ride, Officer Emmett explained. It was clear that she was pissed at him. When Blair heard this, he got a little angry. Kelly, what do you mean? How can this loser be your friend? You'd better go back inside right now. Officer Emmett gave Blair a nasty look and said to Kevin, Ignore him. Let's go. Just then, a long black car with tinted windows screeched to a stop in front of them. The door opened and someone fired what must have been tranquilizer darts at them. Not good, Kevin thought to himself, but before he could react, he felt the world spinning as he fell heavily to the ground. The three of them woke up one after another in what looked like the basement of an industrial building. They weren't sure how long they'd been there. A few bare light bulbs were giving off a dim yellow light. Kevin got up and looked through the tiny window of the heavy steel door and saw 5 or 6 burly men standing guard not far away. Do you know who I am? Hurry up and let us go or I'll make you suffer, Blair shouted as he pounded on the door. What are you yelling about? One of the men said impatiently. Hurry up and let me go, Blair roared loudly. Suddenly one of the other men barked, Pull him out. Moments later, 2 strong men opened the iron door and pulled Blair out of the room. Kevin wanted to take this opportunity to fight back, but realized that he was still under the effects of the tranquilizer. He felt too weak to do anything right now. Let me go, Blair said as he struggled with all his might. A second later, a man dressed in black from head to toe punched him hard on the jaw, knocking out a couple of his teeth. Blood instantly began pouring out of his mouth. Then he punched Blair in the stomach. He collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. That should calm him down, the man said with disdain. Who do you people think you are? Officer Emmett asked indignantly. I'm a lieutenant at the 30th District Station. One of the men walked into the room and said menacingly, We know who you are, Officer Emmett. That's why you're here. You know me? Officer Emmett asked in confusion. Have you forgotten already? You captured dozens of my men lately. Then he added, the day before yesterday you were looking everywhere for me. Xavier Marshall, Officer Emmett finally reacted. From the Alliance? What do you want from me? Officer Emmett knew that they were in trouble. These were desperate criminals. Kevin wondered, what's the Alliance? Marshall took a long look at Kevin and Blair. Officer Emmett, you must be very happy today. You have very handsome companions. Don't talk nonsense, Blair growled angrily. I have nothing to do with this useless bastard. Shut up. I don't care what's going on between you, but as long as you're all here, I may not let you go so easily, Marshall said with an evil smile. Marshall, let them go. I was the one who gave the order for your men to be arrested. It's my responsibility, not theirs. Officer Emmett pleaded with him. She knew very well what kind of dangerous organization the Alliance was. They were cruel and often cold-blooded in their methods, and her department had been trying to stop them for years. But she had no idea what to do to get out of this mess. She's right, Blair said. This obviously is between the two of you, not me. Let me go and I'll pay you whatever you want. Blair was panicked when he realized the men were from the Alliance. How much can you give me? Marshall sneered. Then he said, now that I've captured Officer Emmett, I'm in a good mood. So I'll give you a chance. If you can name a price that I like, I'll let you go. I'll pay $5 million for Officer Emmett's life and my own, Blair quickly replied. $5 million? Do you really think that's enough? Then Marshall smiled cruelly. Anyway, I didn't say that Officer Emmett's life was part of the deal. Then Marshall turned around and looked at Kevin. Since you're friends with them, I figure you're not too poor yourself. Tell me, how much money would you pay in exchange for your life? When Kevin heard this, he clenched his fist. He never thought that Marshall would ask him this kind of question. He's just a freeloader, and he doesn't have any money at all, Blair told him. And I'm not friends with him either. He paused for a moment and then made another offer. If you don't think $5 million is enough, I'll give you another $1 million. Just let me go. When Officer Emmett heard Blair say this, her heart sank. Kevin looked at Marshall and he could tell that the man didn't care what happened to them. He said to himself, I don't think he plans to let us go at all. Marshall looked at Kevin and said, Well, I guess money isn't everything. You can't blame me for asking. Then he said to one of his men, Take him outside. Toss him in the lake when you're done with him. Blair got excited when he heard that. He thought that Marshall was going to accept his offer and only kill Kevin. As soon as they let him go, he'd call the police to rescue Officer Emmett. She'd have to be grateful to him for that. Suddenly, Kevin said very calmly, Wait, I don't have $6 million, but you may be interested in my ring. Kevin showed him the ring he had taken from Dominic Archer. Kevin had a feeling that there was something special about the ring, but he didn't know exactly what it was. The only thing he was sure of was that it was an antique, and it was worth a lot of money. But if he couldn't figure out its secret, then it would be useless to him. He might as well just give the ring to Marshall in exchange for his life. As Marshall took a good look at the ring, his face grew more and more serious. Where did you get this ring from? He asked. He had a feeling he knew, but he just had to be sure. Seeing Marshall's reaction, Kevin decided to string him along. Where did the ring come from? Do you really need me to explain it to you? Kevin pretended to be cold. It took all his courage to push this as far as he could. Blair, who was standing next to Kevin, got upset by his behavior. What are you doing? If you piss him off, he'll kill us all. When Marshall heard this, he turned to Blair and snarled, If you say another word, I'll cut out your tongue. That made Blair shut up right away, but he continued to glare at Kevin. Marshall turned his attention back to Kevin. Of course, I need an explanation. Kevin seemed to be the only one who noticed how jittery Marshall seemed to be. It's always been mine. Kevin said in a tone that made Marshall's blood run cold. When Marshall heard this, he looked like he'd been slapped in the face. Beads of sweat started to form on his forehead. Then Kevin looked Marshall straight in the eye but didn't say a word. Marshall immediately understood. He said, "Take him to the next room. I want to interrogate him properly." Blair saw that Marshall was about to leave. He struggled to stand up and said, "Let me go. I promise that as long as I leave, I'll send someone to deliver $6 million to you." "Work him over," Marshall said to his men. Then he turned around and left the cell. 2 strong men escorted Kevin to the next room. When Kevin reached the door, he saw a few men beating Blair up. It wasn't a pretty sight. When they got to the other room, Marshall asked the 2 men to leave. As soon as the door was closed, the frightened man turned to Kevin and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea who you were." As soon as they were alone, Marshall apologized to Kevin and repeated, "I had no idea you were the Night King." When Kevin heard this, he was puzzled. He had no idea who or what the Night King was. But now that he saw Marshall treating him like his superior, Kevin figured he could take advantage of the situation to get out of the place. If this guy thinks I'm the Night King, I guess I should act the part, Kevin thought to himself. "Well, I can't fault you for your ignorance," Kevin said to him coldly. "Thank you for not punishing me for my behavior," Marshall groveled. Then he cautiously asked, "What's brought you to Chicago? Nobody contacted me to make preparations for your arrival." "Do I need to inform you in advance where I want to go?" Kevin said with a sour expression on his face. Then he added coldly, "Just do your job and leave the rest to me." "Yes, sir," Marshall replied timidly. What Kevin didn't know yet was that nobody in the Alliance knew exactly where the Night King was. Marshall had obviously never met him, but when he saw Kevin, he figured he was too young to be in such a powerful position in the organization. That's why he'd been caught by surprise when he saw Kevin wearing the ring. Kevin casually sat down on a chair and asked him, "You just said that Officer Emmett caught a lot of your gang. How could that happen?" "It's true. She was able to infiltrate our organization." "That doesn't interest me," Kevin impatiently interrupted Marshall. "As long as we haven't been completely exposed in this town, you can handle the rest yourself." "I understand, sir," Marshall said very obediently. Kevin suddenly felt hungry. All he'd managed to have for breakfast was half a cup of coffee at Blair's fancy breakfast. "I haven't eaten anything today," Kevin said awkwardly, but he didn't finish his sentence. "Well, you're a busy man. I'm sure it's hard to find the time. I'll get someone to make something for you right away," Marshall answered very agreeably. Kevin nodded indifferently and Marshall left the room. Once Marshall was gone, Kevin took a look around the room. From the layout, he guessed that this was probably his private office. As he scanned the room, Kevin saw a black box. "What's this?" Kevin slowly walked over to the box and studied it carefully. The door of the room was still closed, so he forced the box open. Inside, there was a small vial of powder and a book on how to prepare advanced herbal remedies. Kevin picked up the book and flipped through it. Then his eye caught a recipe for a powerful hallucinogenic powder that looked a lot like the one in the vial. Based on the description, it seemed to be some kind of herbal weapon. "What the hell is going on here?" he thought to himself. "Everybody seems to be into obscure herbal ingredients. First Cook, then Officer Emmett and Dominic, now this guy." Kevin heard a burst of hurried footsteps outside the door. He didn't have any time to think, so he stuffed the book and the powder under his shirt. Then he quickly closed the box and returned to his seat. When Marshall returned, Kevin clearly noticed that he'd glanced at the box. Was it fear that Kevin saw in the man's eyes? "You seem nervous." Kevin provoked him a little. "I was afraid I was neglecting you, so I rushed back," Marshall explained. Then he turned to the door and said, "Hurry up and bring the food and wine." Before Marshall finished speaking, 3 men came in with trays of sandwiches and fruit, along with a few bottles of wine. They placed it all on the table and hurried out of the room. I'm very sorry, sir, but since I didn't know you were in Chicago, I didn't make any preparations. This is the best we could come up with on short notice," Marshall said apologetically. "I don't mind," Kevin said as he slowly picked up a sandwich. He looked at Marshall and said, "Have you eaten yet? Would you like to sit down and join me?" Kevin hadn't been threatening at all, but Marshall looked a little skittish. He quickly excused himself, saying, "I couldn't impose. Please, enjoy your meal. I'll be waiting outside the door if you need anything." Then Marshall rushed out of the room. Kevin finished off the meal pretty quickly. Then he opened one of the bottles of wine and poured some of the powder into it. "Is there anyone out there?" Kevin called towards the door. Marshall immediately pushed the door open and entered. He asked politely, "Is there anything I can do for you, sir?" "I'd like to reward your men for their diligence," Kevin said as he casually offered the bottle of wine. Marshall took the bottle and replied, "Thank you for your kind offer. However, we only drink to celebrate." "Are you telling me that my arrival here isn't something worth celebrating?" Kevin asked gravely. Marshall was happy to hear this. He knew very well that Kevin was trying to find an excuse for his men to be able to have a drink. "We're very proud to have you with us, sir," Marshall answered in the most flattering tone he could muster. "Then what are you standing there for? Don't you want your men to have this?" Kevin said with a satisfied smile. "I'll give it to them right away," Marshall said gratefully as he headed out the door. Kevin was starting to feel like his plan might work. Once these people drank enough wine, he could try to save Officer Emmett. But he still had some doubts. He'd gotten his ring from Dominic Archer. Whoever wore it obviously wielded a lot of power. But what was the relationship between Dominic and the Alliance? And what the hell was he doing with the ring? But he'd have to figure that out later. Right now, Kevin's top priority was to get out of this place. Unfortunately, a single bottle of wine wouldn't be enough to get everyone here drunk, even with some of the powder in it. So Kevin poured more of the hallucinogen into the rest of the bottles of wine. He mixed them well and called again, "Come back in." Two of Marshall's men immediately walked in. One of them asked him very politely, "What orders do you have, sir?" "No orders, but I see that you've got it pretty tough here. So why don't the two of you take this wine and share it with the rest of the gang?" Kevin said generously. They were overjoyed that he was being so kind to them, especially considering his rank in the Alliance. They took the bottles and gave him a big grin. "Thank you, sir." "Bottoms up," Kevin said as he gestured to them to leave the room. After the two of them left, Kevin walked over to the room where Officer Emmett and Blair were being held. As he approached, the guards greeted him politely. Kevin gave a slight nod and instructed them, "Go and have a drink and a bite to eat with your buddies. I can watch these guys for a while." "Thank you, sir," they said excitedly as they headed over to join their comrades. What Kevin didn't know yet was that he'd gotten the whole gang worked up. There hadn't been anything to celebrate lately, so they hadn't had any alcohol in weeks. After they left, Officer Emmett was baffled. "Kevin, what the hell is going on? Why are they calling you sir?" "I'm not sure. They probably think I'm some big shot," Kevin said with a shrug. "It has to be a mistake. How could a lowlife like you be anyone of importance? They've obviously confused you with someone else," Blair sneered. Kevin looked at Blair and saw just how much he'd gotten worked over. His nose and cheek were swollen and there was still dried blood around his mouth. To add insult to injury, he was shackled to a pipe in the corner of the cell. Officer Emmett ignored Blair's insults. Instead, she turned her attention to Kevin and told him, "Since that's the case, you should find a way out of here. Then you can get some help and come back for us." "Just be a little patient," Kevin said with a smile. Officer Emmett was confused by his mellow attitude. A few seconds later, outside the room, there was a heavy thud. Then there was another one, along with the sound of breaking glass. "I drunk their wine," Kevin said with a smile. "Maybe you're not so useless after all," Blair said excitedly. "Don't just stand there. Hurry up and let us out." Kevin ignored Blair and walked over to Officer Emmett, who was still tied to her chair. Kevin untied her and helped her stand up. "I don't know exactly how long they'll be knocked out. We need to leave as soon as possible." Kevin said as he opened the cell door to let Officer Emmett out. "Can't you see that I'm still tied up?" Blair shouted. "And keep your filthy hands off of Kelly." "Blair, didn't you just agree to pay $6 million to save your own life?" Kevin asked with a sardonic grin. "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Blair complained. "If you two leave me here alone, they won't care about my $6 million. I'm finished." "I haven't seen any sign that you're all that smart," Kevin replied. "Just stop talking and let me out," Blair sobbed. Officer Emmett sighed and said, "Kevin, please just let him out." "But Blair is so rich and powerful. How could he let a lowlife like me help him? He wouldn't live it down at the country club," Kevin retorted. "Stop being a hypocrite. If they hadn't mistaken you for someone else, you'd be dead right now," Blair roared. "Did you hear that? Officer Emmett, Blair definitely doesn't want me to save him," Kevin said calmly. He wasn't worried at all. From what he saw in the book, they should be knocked out for hours. Officer Emmett sighed again. "Kevin, I know Blair is far from perfect, and I apologize for his behavior, but please let him out anyway, okay?" "Apologize? It's up to him to apologize, not you," Kevin answered firmly. "Kevin, you piece of shit! You want me to apologize to you? Dream on," Blair grumbled. "Kelly, don't waste your breath on him. He's not worth it." "Can you please stop arguing?" Officer Emmett said impatiently. "Don't you know who Marshall is? If we leave you here, you'll be dead by morning." Blair was stunned to hear her say this. He knew she wasn't exaggerating. Kevin didn't want to waste any more time. "I'm not worried. Blair can afford to pay his way out." "Kevin, I'm begging you. Let Blair out," Officer Emmett pleaded. But after all of Blair's cruel insults, she wasn't very confident that Kevin would listen to her. He was under no obligation to save her fiancé. "Okay, I'll do it for you, not him," Kevin finally gave in. "But there's just one condition. You have to say please." "Kevin, you're just being a bully," Blair shouted. Kevin raised an eyebrow when he heard this. He laughed mockingly and said, "Well, you certainly should know bullying when you see it. That's all you've done since I met you." "Stop arguing." Officer Emmett looked Kevin in the eye and said, "Please." Kevin couldn't say no to her. He smiled smugly and said to Blair, "I'm doing this for Officer Emmett, not for you." Then he walked over to Blair to take a look at his shackles. "Be careful how you speak to me or you'll regret it," Blair growled. "I've never seen such an ungrateful bastard, even in the Jones family." "All right, let's see how you do when those guys all wake up," Kevin told Blair as he turned around and started walking away. "Please don't leave me here. I was wrong. Help me, please," Blair whined. He suddenly realized how close he was to facing Marshall and the others on his own. Kevin shook his head in disbelief. He reached down and grabbed the shackle. With a powerful twist, he broke the lock. Then the three of them left the room. The Alliance's Chicago stronghold was a vast network of tunnels. It must have taken them 2 hours to find their way out and get back into the city. On top of everything, Kevin had to swing by the Jones mansion on the way home so he could pick up his car. When Kevin returned to his penthouse at Corwin Tower, it was already past 3 o'clock in the morning and Lily was still sleeping. Kevin went into the study and opened the book he'd taken from the marshal's office, Alliance Advanced Herbal Manufacturing. As he flipped through it, he found scores of fascinating recipes for all sorts of uses, from healing to self-improvement to what you would call weaponized herbs, like the powder that he just used on Marshall's guards. Then Kevin's eyes were drawn to a sentence that was printed boldly in red. "These are the ultimate herbal manufacturing techniques of the Alliance. Anyone other than the Alliance's supreme leader who uses these methods without permission will be punished severely." "I wonder if Marshall stole this book from the Alliance," Kevin thought to himself. But he didn't care about that now. After all, if these recipes were only for the use of the Alliance's supreme leader, They had to be pretty effective. He kept reading until the sun rose over Lake Michigan. Somehow, even after the exhausting day that he just spent, he wasn't really tired. In fact, he felt refreshed. Finally, when he heard Lily getting up in the other room, he put the book away and went out into the hall. Lily was walking out of the bedroom and saw Kevin leaving the study. She yawned and asked him, "With all these bedrooms, why would you sleep in the study?" "Well, when I got back last night, I went into the study to do some reading. I guess I must have fallen asleep," Kevin replied with a disarming smile. "That's nice," Lily said happily. "Hey, Grandma just had someone give me a call. She said she has something she wants to discuss with everyone. Everybody in the family has to drop what they're doing and get to the mansion by 10:30. "Okay, I'll take you over there," Kevin nodded. He went to clean up and change his clothes. Luckily, Kevin had gone back to the Jones mansion last night and driven his car back to Corwin Tower. Otherwise, they'd ask too many questions if he showed up today with another one. As they were driving out to the mansion, Kevin couldn't help asking Lily, "Didn't we just hold a family meeting yesterday?" "After you left with Officer Emmett yesterday, we were told that Meriwether would be held for arraignment. So his deal with the family ended up falling through," Lily explained unemotionally. After her family's cold-hearted reaction to Meriwether's attack on her yesterday, Lily had pretty much given up on them. Kevin was sure that nothing good would come of this meeting, so he sent a quick message to Tyler while he was waiting at a red light. When they reached the mansion, Kevin walked with Lily up to the front door. "You'd better not go in," she whispered to him. "If I don't go in, they'll blame you for everything," Kevin said as he took Lily's hand and comforted her. "Don't be afraid. I'm used to being insulted. It helps that I don't give a damn what they think." Lily was touched when she heard this. She understood exactly what Kevin meant. Then she remembered how Kevin didn't hesitate to stand up and fight with Meriwether for her yesterday. This gave her a warm feeling inside. As Kevin and Lily entered the hall, Jason jumped up and shouted, "Kevin, you've got some nerve coming here. If it wasn't for you, we'd have been able to sell our shares," Jason said as he glared at Kevin. The rest of the family started insulting him, saying that Lily would be better off with Meriwether than with Kevin. Then they defended Meriwether, saying it was just his nature to be aggressive. Jason jeered at Kevin and said, "If I were you, I'd divorce Lily right now. Think of her future. Mr. Meriwether would treat her well, better than you can." This really pissed Kevin off. He snapped back. "Meriwether? Didn't you just see him sitting on the floor in the middle of this room, waiting for the police to take him away?" Kevin looked Jason in the eyes and added, "Don't you know when you're betting on the wrong horse? Of course not, because you're a jackass." "What did you just say? Did you just call me a jackass?" Jason clenched his fists tightly. He wanted to teach Kevin a lesson. But then he thought about how badly Kevin had beaten Meriwether yesterday and how quickly he had done it. He unclenched his fists and sat back down. Kevin didn't pay any more attention to Jason. Instead, he looked around the room at the rest of the family. Then he said to them all sternly, "I just want to ask you one question. If I went and found a gangster to flirt with your wife or daughter right in front of you, would you laugh and cheer?" This meant nothing to them, and they went back to defending Meriwether and saying how much better off they'd all be if Lily married him. This gave Jason the courage to speak up again. "Because of you and your husband, we couldn't sell any of our shares yesterday. Lily, tell me what to do." Jason took a breath and added, "Do this for the family." "Family?" she yelled. "Yesterday I was being assaulted right in this room, and none of you lifted a finger to help me." Grandma Jones slammed her fist on the table. "Enough," she said coldly. "Lily, you'd be better off with Mr. Meriwether. I thought about it all night, and I've come to a decision. After Mr. Meriwether is released from jail, you will divorce Kevin. Then I'll make arrangements for you to marry our new business partner." "Grandma, no," Lily said insistently. "I'll never divorce Kevin." "Whether you agree or not isn't up to you. "The two of you will divorce today," Grandma Jones declared. "This is for the future of the Jones family. It's not negotiable." As Grandma Jones finished speaking, the blood drained from Lily's face. But the rest of the family was smiling broadly. They figured that, as long as Lily married Meriwether, they'd be able to sell their shares and start their new company. As for whether Lily would be happy or not, they weren't concerned at all. While they were rejoicing, Kevin suddenly laughed out loud. "This really is a joke." "Why are you laughing?" Grandma Jones asked him angrily. "Why am I laughing? It's because you're not only short-sighted, but you're also fools. You've been deceived, and you also want to sacrifice my wife for this great chance for a comeback." Kevin continued to mock them. "You're willing to sell one of your own just for money. You don't know anything about familial love. That's why I'm laughing." "What are you talking about?" Grandma Jones said as she stood up from her chair. "Who are you to criticize us?" "You've lost control of your business, and now you're trying to give my wife to Meriwether in exchange for money to fund your next disaster." Kevin's expression slowly became serious. "You're quite the leader." "Get out of here! Someone toss him out the door right now!" Grandma Jones yelled. "I'd like to see you try," Kevin said calmly, without a hint of fear in his voice. Who would dare to lay a hand on him after seeing him toss Meriwether around like a doll in this very room? Nobody said a word. Lily saw that the situation was getting out of control and she was very worried. She tugged at Kevin's sleeve and said, "Please don't say anything else. Grandma's already very angry." "Don't worry, Lily. These people will come crawling back to you," Kevin said gently to Lily. The Joneses heard this and started to whisper to each other. What did he mean by that? Why would they beg Lily for anything? Grandma Jones looked at Kevin and Lily and realized that they loved each other. Before she could say anything, though, the family butler called from the foyer. "Mrs. Jones, the CEO of KWTD Corporation, Mr. Tyler Dawn, is here to see you." She motioned for her senior advisors to join her and walked quickly to the door to greet Tyler.
"I'm sorry to disturb you again," Tyler said as he walked into the reception room with his assistants. He had a big, broad smile on his face.
"To what do we owe the pleasure?" Grandma Jones asked graciously.
"I'm in a bit of a hurry, so I'll get straight to the point," he replied. "May I ask if Lily is here today? I'm actually here to speak with her."
Before Grandma Jones could answer, Tyler had already found Lily in the crowd. He walked up to her quickly.
"I'm Tyler Dawn. Very pleased to finally meet you, my friend," he smiled and said. "It's true what they say. You are quite beautiful."
When Tyler said this, nobody understood what was going on. Why was he being so friendly to Lily? But they weren't ready for what he said next.
"My dear friend, I have to leave town for some urgent business, so I've decided to transfer my shares in the Jones Family Company to you, along with the earnings from the Import-Export Company. It will all be placed in your name and your name only."
Then Tyler gestured for one of his assistants to hand a document to Lily for her to sign. For the first time today, nobody knew what to say. Grandma and the rest of the family were stunned for a moment. Then their faces lit up as it sank in that they could get everything back again. If Tyler Dawn transferred his shares to Lily, wouldn't that be the same as returning all the shares to the Jones family? Not only that, but they'd picked up an international trade company to boot. This was a great day for the Jones family. But Tyler had more to say.
"My friend, there is one thing I must make clear to you first. These shares are worth $300 million. I only transfer them to you because I trust you. That's the only reason I did this."
After saying this, Tyler gave Lily a smile and then turned around to look at everyone. "Don't worry, I won't let you down," Lily said nervously. "But, Mr. Dawn, there's one thing I don't understand. Why do you keep calling me friend? This is the first time we've met." A big smile suddenly appeared on Tyler's face. Before answering Lily's question, he walked over to Kevin. While everyone watched in amazement, Tyler put his hand on Kevin's shoulder.
Of course it's because you're Mr. Williams' wife, Tyler said candidly. Mr. Williams, if you'd told me that Lily was your wife, I'd have transferred all the shares to her the last time I came here. What? If you'd taken a break from your business now and then and stopped by to visit, you'd have met her sooner, Kevin said with a laugh. I stand corrected, Tyler said with a friendly smile. Just then, one of Tyler's assistants walked over and whispered something in his ear. Tyler's demeanor got more serious. Kevin, I was hoping to have dinner with you, but I need to deal with an urgent matter in New York. Unfortunately, I have to run. Okay. Have a safe trip, Kevin replied as he shook his hand. Then Tyler headed out the door, followed by his assistants and his bodyguards. It took a long time for the Jones family to finally come back to their senses. They looked at Kevin in shock and awe. How could he be such good friends with Tyler Dawn? Lily took a deep breath and asked Kevin hesitantly, You know Tyler Dawn? Yes, we're pretty good friends, Kevin answered very seriously. Then he added, Lily, now that this issue with the shares has been taken care of, I have to go and run some errands that my boss gave me. Before Lily could ask any questions that he wasn't ready to answer yet, Kevin turned around and quickly left the mansion. Jason could barely look at Lily. No one would have thought that 60% of the family shares would end up in Lily's hands. This controlling share in the company actually made her more important than Grandma Jones. Grandma Jones looked at Lily with a worried expression and had no idea what to say. Just then, Lily's phone vibrated. It was a text from Kevin with a simple message. He told her to hang on tight to the shares and not transfer them to anyone, no matter what. But Lily really didn't need Kevin's reminder. After what happened over the past 2 days, she wasn't particularly fond of the Jones family, relatives or not. Kevin had just returned to his office at Williams Media when he got a phone call. Yes, I'm Kevin. May I ask who this is? Kevin asked in confusion. After all, not many people knew his personal phone number. Hello, Mr. Williams. My name is Philip Quinn. Dominic Archer gave me your number, the man said seriously. Kevin knew right away what the man wanted. Would you like to purchase one of my herbal pills? Yes, Mr. Williams. Dominic said that your pill worked miracles for him. So go ahead and name your price. I promise not to bargain with you, Quinn replied openly. You won't bargain with me? Kevin was surprised and thought to himself, it sounds like I've found someone else with deep pockets. Then a smile appeared on Kevin's face. How about this? If you're really serious, give me a call at this time tomorrow. The price will be the same as I said for Dominic Archer, $500,000. Can you afford that? $500,000? No problem. Then it's a deal, Quinn replied happily. After hanging up the phone, Kevin had a moment of regret. Quinn didn't even flinch at $500,000. He should have probably raised the price. Just then, Miss Wilson came into the office. Mr. Williams, you have visitors, she said excitedly. Visitors? For me? Kevin was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Please, send them in. When the middle-aged couple entered the office, Kevin immediately jumped up from his chair and ran over to them. Mom, Dad, when did you get to Chicago? Kevin was so excited. He gave them a hug and said, Please have a seat. Miss Wilson watched the reunion from the doorway and then quietly slipped out of the office. Kevin, I heard from your uncle that he put Williams Media under your name. I came to see for myself, Alan Williams said happily. Before Kevin could answer, his mother, Susan Williams, asked him, Kevin, are you really the CEO of Williams Media now? Yes, Mom and Dad. I've been helping the company a lot, so Uncle Thomas put me in charge, Kevin said humbly. Then he offered cheerfully, Hey, now that you're here, why don't you stay in Chicago? I bought an enormous penthouse apartment at the top of Corwin Tower. There's plenty of room for all of us. After Kevin was pushed out by the family, Alan and Sue went back to their old house in the country. Kevin hadn't seen them in almost a year. Alan and Sue looked at each other and nodded in agreement. That sounds fine, but we don't want to put you out. We can always find an apartment, Alan said. Then Sue spoke up and said, But actually, we came to tell you some good news. Your cousin Monty Aspinwall is getting married in New York tomorrow. Before Sue could finish, Kevin's phone rang. It was his Uncle Thomas. He accepted the call and heard his uncle's calm voice.
"Hi, Kevin. Are you free tomorrow?"
"Sure, Uncle Thomas. What's going on?" Kevin asked curiously.
"It's like this. Your cousin is getting married tomorrow, so I'd like to invite you back into the family as a guest."
Uncle Thomas said cheerfully. "Of course. I'll definitely come," Kevin said excitedly. Then they discussed the details for a minute before saying goodbye. "Did your uncle just invite you to attend Monty's wedding?" Alan asked him with a smile. "Yes, he did. Let's all go there together," Kevin said happily. In the entire family except for his parents, Monty was the one who had the best relationship with Kevin. In fact, when Kevin was pushed out of the family, Monty was the first one to speak up in his defense. Unfortunately, not many people listened to what Monty had to say. "That's a great idea," Alan answered as he looked at Kevin with a pleased expression. "We'll let you get back to work now. Your father and I haven't been to the city in a long time. We're going to take a walk," Susan said with a smile. Then Alan and Susan headed out to spend the day walking around downtown Chicago. After his parents left, Kevin asked Miss Wilson to buy him a suit. He didn't forget to ask her to choose a gift for the newlyweds. The next morning, Kevin and his parents headed to Midway Airport to take the company jet to New York. The flight only took a couple of hours, and Miss Wilson, with her usual efficiency, had arranged for them to be picked up in a company limo to go to the Williams family mansion. They arrived a little early, but there were already countless luxury cars parked in front. Everywhere you looked, there was someone famous or influential coming and going from the mansion. Monty, who had been standing at the entrance welcoming the guests, brightened up immediately when he saw Kevin. "Kevin, you're finally here. I've been waiting for you." Monty grinned as he gave Kevin a big hug. "I missed you too," Kevin said as he slapped his cousin on the back. Then Monty noticed Alan and Susan Williams, who had come along with Kevin. "Uncle Alan, Aunt Susan," Monty called out happily. "Monty, it's been such a long time. You're getting more and more handsome," Susan said with a smile. "Thank you for the compliment, Aunt Susan." Monty was a little embarrassed. Then he turned to his fiancée and took her by the hand. "Hannah, let me introduce you to more of my family. This is Cousin Kevin, Uncle Alan, and Aunt Susan." Alan asked, "Isn't it bad luck to see the bride before the wedding?" "Oh, we're not superstitious," Hannah answered calmly. Then she shook each of their hands. Kevin nodded politely and smiled as he called her Cousin Hannah. Although this was the first time he'd met her, he could tell that she was intelligent and witty. "Kevin, my dad and the rest of the family are waiting in the main hall," Monty said anxiously. "Oh, of course. You have a lot of other guests to greet. We'll head in and take a seat," Kevin said in an understanding tone of voice. As he looked at the big, ornate front door of the mansion, Kevin started to get a little emotional. He vividly remembered the last time he walked out this door a few years ago. His father patted him on the shoulder and said, "Kevin, that's all in the past now. Let's live in the present and look toward the future." "You're right, Dad," Kevin said sincerely. When Kevin and his family walked into the reception hall, Uncle Thomas was greeting the guests warmly. When he saw Kevin, Thomas immediately put down his wine glass and walked over with a big smile. "Kevin, I'm so glad you could make it." Then Thomas looked at Alan and Susan. "It's good to see you finally made it back." "It's been a few years, hasn't it? Monty's wedding seemed like a good opportunity to reconnect." Alan's tone was a little sad. "Alan, please don't blame Dad and our uncle for what happened back then. They have their own troubles now." Thomas naturally understood why his brother was feeling like this. Just as Kevin was about to say something to liven up the atmosphere, he heard a sharp voice. "I was wondering who this big shot was. I see the three of you made it to Monty's wedding. When are you leaving?" Laura Williams said coldly. "Laura, what did you just say? I called Alan and his family to personally invite them back." Thomas was very disappointed in his wife. Laura didn't understand what had happened with Kevin as well as her husband Thomas did. When the Williams family was facing a financial crisis, Grandpa Williams had personally sent his son Thomas a message. He was to make a special trip to Chicago to find Kevin and ask for forgiveness. That's when Kevin agreed to invest his fortune in the Williams family business. So technically speaking, even the Williams mansion belonged to Kevin now. In other words, if Kevin felt like it, he could easily bankrupt the entire Williams family. What are you talking about? They have the nerve to come back today after everything they did? Laura said spitefully. Their good little boy Kevin is even worse. He went off and married into another family, mooching off of them for 3 years. Laura's ranting drew the attention of a lot of the guests. Kevin and his parents were starting to get pissed off. Laura turned her nose up at Kevin and said, "Don't think you can come in here acting all fancy just because you're in charge of Williams Media. Everyone knows that you're only in that position because Thomas took pity on you. The family has lots of other businesses. We don't need that one at all." Then Ethan Williams, Kevin's cousin and the son of Thomas and Laura, stepped out from the crowd and said, "Kevin, you got a lot of nerve coming here today." Laura chimed in, "You're an embarrassment to the entire family. Why don't you just go back to Chicago?" "Lauren, Ethan, shut up. Don't do this in front of all the guests," Thomas whispered to the two of them. Then he turned around and said, "Kevin, Alan, please don't pay any attention to them. They've already had too much to drink." But by now, Kevin was insulted. Alan was so angry that his chest was heaving up and down, and Susan was so repulsed that she was starting to look pale. "What's wrong with you, Thomas? How can you help these outcasts?" Laura complained. So far, the wedding wasn't off to a great start. Would Thomas be able to do anything at all to turn things around? When Kevin and his parents arrived at Monty's wedding in New York, everything went well until his Aunt Laura and his cousin Ethan started to insult them. Uncle Thomas tried to calm things down, but he wasn't having any luck. "You know, Dad, I think you're the one who drank too much. I can't believe you're actually siding with them," Ethan said with a sneer. "Uncle Alan and Susan, what possessed you to come here?" Actually, ever since they were kids, Ethan had never liked Kevin all that much. Even though he was older, it seemed that Kevin was always better than him, no matter what they were doing. The family had decided to expel Kevin as punishment after his failure in a large investment. But later on, when Kevin's luck turned around and he became super wealthy, Uncle Thomas went and tracked him down to ask him to take over as CEO of Williams Media, as long as he saved the family from bankruptcy. Ethan was jealous because he'd been running the company up until they needed the bailout from Kevin. How could he ever get over a humiliation like that? "Ethan, let's not argue on Monty's wedding day. It won't go well for you," Kevin said coldly. Kevin didn't mind being insulted, but he absolutely couldn't stand seeing his parents treated like this. "What? Did I hear you right? Are you saying you don't want to argue with me?" Ethan laughed and said, "What are you going to do about it? You couldn't take me anyway." "Enough. What are you guys doing? We're all family," Thomas said angrily. "Why do you guys always have to fight?" "Who said we're related?" Laura sneered. "Just look at what they're wearing. They look like a bunch of vagrants who have come to crash the wedding." When Laura finished speaking, Alan's face suddenly turned pale. He moaned and collapsed on the floor. "Dad, what's wrong?" Kevin said as he knelt down and cradled his father. "Alan, you're scaring me," Susan said in a panic. Kevin immediately took out his phone and dialed 911. Then he looked up and glared at Ethan and Laura. He knew very well that his father had collapsed from holding in the anger that was boiling up inside him while he was listening to Laura and Ethan's insults. "Ethan, if something happens to my father, I'll hold you personally responsible," Kevin said bitterly. He could feel the adrenaline building up inside him. Ethan turned his head and looked away. Then Kevin suddenly looked at his Uncle Thomas and said, "It seems I made a bad choice lending money to the Williams family. I think I may just pull out my $3 billion and head back to Chicago." Everyone who heard this was stunned. They knew that Kevin had been shut out years ago, so where did he find $3 billion? Laura put her hands on her hips and snapped at Kevin. "You seem to be confused. Why do you think we'd lend you any money?" "I think you've had a little too much to drink already. I'm not asking for a loan. I gave you the loan. I lent $3 billion to the family to bail them out of the mess they'd gotten into. Just ask Uncle Thomas. He wrote up the contract," Kevin said firmly. Thomas was appalled, and it showed on his face. He quickly walked over to Laura and pulled her away by the elbow. "What's going on?" Laura asked him. "What's he talking about?" Ethan was confused too. "Dad, what are you doing?" He was naturally protective of his mother. Monty heard all the noise and rushed over with Hannah. "Kevin, what happened to Uncle Alan?" Monty asked nervously. Kevin didn't answer him. He just stared at Thomas coldly and said, "I'll give you 1 day, Uncle Thomas. At this time tomorrow, I'm coming back for my money." Then he picked up his father from the floor and walked carefully towards the door. Suddenly, Ethan roared, "Stop! Who said you could leave?" "Ethan, what are you talking about?" Monty said unhappily. "Monty, this is none of your business. Stay out of it," Ethan said with a ferocious expression on his face. "If you weren't getting married today, I wouldn't have even wasted my time talking to you." It made Monty sad to hear this, but he took a step back. Monty was only tied to the Williams family through marriage, so he didn't have much say in things, especially compared to Ethan. An ambulance soon arrived at the mansion's entrance. Kevin helped them load his father in the van, and his mother rode along with them. Kevin would follow them as soon as he could. As the ambulance drove away with its siren blaring, Kevin turned around and went back inside. Ethan was the first to jump up. "Don't you get it? You've already ruined Monty's wedding. Why the hell did you come back?" "Who says I can't come back?" Kevin said coldly. "You're no longer a member of this family. You just aren't welcome here. Get the hell out right now," Ethan said viciously. As far as Ethan was concerned, it was because of Kevin that he'd lost his place in Williams media. And he thought that Kevin had just embarrassed his mother Laura in front of the entire family, so he really had it in for Kevin. "Shut up," Thomas told him. Then he pointed to the other side of the room and said, "Now go wait over there and don't say another word." Then Thomas turned around and looked at Kevin. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Kevin, we're all family here. Let's work this out." "No, Ethan just said that I'm no longer a member of this family," Kevin said blankly. His face didn't show any expression at all. Nothing his uncle said could get him to change his mind. "But Kevin, how can you talk to Uncle Thomas like this?" Monty asked worriedly. "Monty Aspinwall," and Kevin emphasized that his cousin had a different last name. "Don't worry. Tomorrow you can come over to Williams Media for a job. Some people don't want to see us succeed. Well, I guess you can't please everyone." Then Kevin gave Ethan a nasty look. "Kevin, I don't know what to say," Monty replied, shaking his head. Thomas was at a loss for words too. After all, this whole mess had been caused by his wife and his son. "Uncle Thomas, remember what I said. I'll be back tomorrow for my money," Kevin warned his uncle. Then he turned around and looked at Monty. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm so sorry I messed up your wedding, Monty." He took a beautifully decorated gift envelope out of his pocket and handed it to his cousin. It was the one Miss Wilson had prepared for him with a very generous check inside. "You don't have to put up with this. Come to Chicago." Without giving Monty any time to react, Kevin patted him on the shoulder and left the mansion. He knew his father was still unconscious, so he had to rush to the hospital immediately. As Thomas watched Kevin walk away, he turned to his son and shook his head. "This is all because of you," Uncle Thomas said menacingly. Kevin got to the hospital within 20 minutes and saw that his father wasn't being treated yet. Instead, his gurney was just sitting in the corridor. His mother was pleading with the nurse, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please help him. I'll give you anything you want as soon as my son gets here." "I'm sorry, but the administrator already told you. This is a private hospital and you have no insurance coverage. We can keep him stable, but there's nothing else we can do other than have him transferred to one of the city hospitals," the nurse said sternly. After Alan and Susan left Chicago to live in the countryside, their income came from selling vegetables. They'd managed to save a little money, but certainly not enough to pay for an operation. The intake administrator had sized them up and figured their son probably couldn't afford treatment either. She didn't want to risk a reprimand if Alan went into the operating room without approval. When Susan saw her son walk in, she immediately calmed down. Kevin, we're over here. Quickly tell them to go ahead and operate on your father. Mom, what's going on? Kevin asked in confusion. He didn't know why his mother looked so distraught. They said that if we can't afford the surgery, all they can do is stabilize him, Susan said as she wiped tears from her face. What kind of hospital is this? A human life is at stake, and you want to get paid first? Kevin's expression became instantly cold. I'll cover everything. Now send him to surgery immediately. Your father's stable, but he needs our hospital's chief specialist. The bill for this kind of surgery is $120,000. The administrator said impatiently. I just explained this to your mother, and she said that you would give it to her as soon as you arrive. Do you have $120,000 on you? I said I'll pay you. You need to operate on him immediately, Kevin said through his gritted teeth. The administrator didn't believe him and insisted that he pay immediately. Kevin couldn't take this any longer and shouted so loud that you could hear him in the parking lot. I told you to arrange the surgery immediately. The nurse was frightened by Kevin's outburst and her face turned pale. Everyone up and down the corridor began to wonder what was happening. They assumed that Kevin and his parents couldn't afford to pay for treatment and were fighting with the hospital administrator. Just then, the hospital director arrived with a few security guards. At the same moment, Kevin's phone rang. When he saw that it was Quinn calling, Kevin answered. Before Kevin could say anything, Quinn explained, Mr. Williams, I know you're in my hospital right now. Wait for me right there. I'll be down there as soon as I can. Then he hung up.
What's going on here? The director asked in a very serious tone.
Director, thank you for coming so quickly. These two people can't afford to pay the medical fees and are insisting on treatment. We've already stabilized the patient, and there's nothing else we can do. Their son was just yelling at me, and if you hadn't brought security, I'm sure he would have hit me. She exaggerated to make herself look good. Hearing this, the director slowly walked over to Kevin and said, Young man, I can understand your feelings, but the hospital has its rules and regulations. As long as you can arrange payment, we will immediately prepare your father for surgery. Pay first? What kind of hospital is this? Kevin said loudly. Those are the rules. All we are required to do is stabilize a patient. If our administrator believes the payment will not be possible, we are not required to do anything more. If you continue to cause trouble, I'll ask security to have you removed from the property, the hospital director threatened. All this for just $120,000? I'll give it to you now, Kevin grumbled as he slapped his bank card on the counter. The director took one look at Kevin's black card and stared at him in shock. Then he said, I'm sorry, but we don't accept fake cards. Kevin was so frustrated. His father lay there dying and he couldn't get anyone to help him.